All right, well, packed room. Awesome, it's great, thank you guys. Yeah, but at the same time, I just kind of flip it on its head and say this is an opportunity for us to dig deep into this area. So I'm Federico Vaca. I'm the Executive Vice Chair of Emergency Medicine at UC Irvine. And so you're in the right place if you want to learn a little bit about the unveiled and the pragmatic pieces of the hidden curriculum, and we'll talk more about that. We really have, there's nothing for our team to disclose here. As I mentioned, now at UC Irvine, really excited to be back. Thanks, Chris, and everybody else. Many of the things that about the background of our speakers are in the app. Our learning objectives, fairly straightforward. We are trying to drill down a little bit into the whole area of this hidden curriculum. These are the pieces, kind of the facets of things that you encounter as you move through your career. And really, they're kind of the norms, the values, sometimes in certain areas of content as you go through your career, whether that's administration, education, research, and it really encompasses also behaviors within the academic setting. You know, how do you navigate your academic career, your advancement, relationships? All those things have a considerable impact on how you move forward in career, and quite frankly, has an impact on whether departments can sometimes retain faculty, which is really important. So I'm not going to say too much more. That's kind of the piece of it. The other thing that if you want a little bit of a model in your head or mental model about this is like, if you were at a certain stage of your career, and if you could talk to your younger self, what would you say to help you navigate things a little bit more easily, right? So we're going to run one of our faculty, one right after the other, hold questions, and then we're just going to open up and have just open discussion. If it remains this small, we just can dig even deeper on that. And they're going to talk a little bit about their background, their trajectory, as well as roll in some of the facets of this hidden curriculum that they've encountered while they've gone through their career. So our first up is Dr. Coupet from Yale School of Medicine.
All right. Oh, perfect. So again, thank you, Dr. Vaca, for having me on this panel. I'm Edouard Coupet. I'm an assistant professor at Yale, and I'm also core faculty in the Yale Program for Addiction Medicine. And my research interest really focuses on the intersection of emergency department access for addiction treatment, as well as health equity and injury prevention. So for sake of time, we'll just get right back into it. So I've been very fortunate enough to have some really amazing colleagues and mentors that have accomplished a lot in their career, and specifically in terms of like moving the field of emergency medicine forward. But one thing I've realized over the course of my career, and that they all have uniformly encountered, is rejection, and really a lot of it. And so there was this study that came out maybe a couple years ago in Nature that compared junior scientists who were just below the funding line to those who were just above the funding line and got their grants accepted. And they found out actually a few years out that those on their first grant submission, and they found that those were just below the funding line and didn't get their grant accepted on the first try, that they ended up having more citations, more high-impact papers over the course of their career. And I think that's really a testament to resiliency and grit and the ability to push through rejection, because it's something we all encounter. And what it ends up happening is the bottom line is that, can you pick yourself back up? Can you learn from your mistakes and repivot and keep moving forward? And so, second of which, in terms of the hidden curriculum, is, as far as science, we all dig deep in terms of learning the science, critical thinking skills, et cetera. But what's equally important is, in terms of learning the science, is also how we communicate the science. Interpersonal skills, more specifically, is what I'm speaking of. And that would seem like common sense, but it's not so common, as the adage says, because those interpersonal skills, or strong interpersonal skills, were what will lead to strong interpersonal relationships, and those relationships will lead to future areas of collaboration, mentorship, and that's really what's going to determine a successful career. I'm sure we all can attest to people that you work with that you just enjoy working with, and that's what really drives a successful collaboration and project. So. Last but not least, I'm here to tell you all to lower your standards. And what I mean by that specifically is that early on in my career, I would send these very long, very well thought out emails to senior faculty asking them a question, and I would often get 1 or 2 word responses, at best a sentence. And back then, I always wondered, like, why I'm spending so much time in these emails, why am I just getting a sentence at most in a response? And over time, I've realized it's simply because you don't have the time to invest in email as an example. As you progress through your career, you're going to have more opportunities. And we all have the same 24 hours in the day. So you have to find areas where you're going to strategically lower your standards so you can spend time on things that really matter and that are most important to you. And email, I use it as an example, but I'm sure you all can cite many other examples of things where you could potentially lower your standards, spend less time, and save time in that area to spend time in things that matter more to you. And this is a bonus session. I know we were tasked with just giving 3 things, but my bonus piece of the hidden curriculum is that anytime I work with residents, one of the first things I say is if someone walks to you down the street and asks you, who are you? If the first thing you say is, I'm an emergency medicine physician, you are behind the 8 ball significantly. You are, in my case, I'm a father, I'm a husband, son, all of these things come first, a friend first. An emergency medicine physician and researcher is a portion of what I truly am, and that's what's going to provide longevity in your career and give you more success in everything long term. Specifically in this climate where we're talking about wellness and burnout. So, thank you all.
So I'm Shannon Toohey, and we all have a little bit of a different background here, so I think I'm the educator of the group. We're all educators, but my focus is education as opposed to research. So just a little bit about my background. Aside from my fellowship and my master's, when I was starting out, I just went to every education conference I could find because I wanted to see what other educators were doing. I wanted to see what best practices were. So I just kind of sought out as much as I could. And then as far as leadership positions, I'm guessing even the most junior person in this room, you are a leader in some facet of your department or your group, right? Like we all have that, there's some component. So a lot of my medical education leadership really started in my last year of residency when I was a chief resident. I really kind of solidified my desire to be a medical educator and then became APD and ultimately PD. And then as far as my research, I do tend to focus on educational content. So that's where my primary research lies. I've done a lot of mentoring of juniors and students, of course. My colleagues and myself recognized there was not a lot of options for dissemination of actual education content instead of the research about that content. So we started a journal, the Journal of Education, Teaching, and Emergency Medicine. And then as far as grants, there's been smaller institutional grants and internal grants. And then I did have the opportunity for a larger government contract on AR in medical education. And then as far as other experiences, I kind of went pretty broad early on. So I tried some GME, there was UME, I was involved in faculty development, I sought opportunities to be speakers at conferences, I was a reviewer for a couple of journals, I was in School of Medicine committees, I even touched my toe into some operations QI because it interests me, it affects my residents. But as far as the 3 things I wish I'd known a little bit earlier, say yes, mentors are everything, and pay it forward. So as far as say yes, I think right now everyone kind of hears the adage like learn to say no, and I do tell my fellows that. But early on, you should say yes to a lot of things because it's going to help you clarify your interests. If you try things and you don't like them, that's going to point in a direction or help you solidify what it is you want to do with your career. And you cannot plan everything as much as I try to. So most of your career is a combination of your interests, timing, and a lot of luck. So if you have this thought of, I'm going to be program director, or I'm going to be a researcher in addiction medicine, and no opportunities that aren't the exact road that you see to that, you say no to, you're going to get lost and you're going to be stuck. So you can't plan for it. You have to count a little bit on the timing. So if there's something that you can gain experience from, if there's something that you can learn more things from, you can meet some new people for networking, it's probably worth your while. And that's where it comes down to be a little selfish. So you still should consider the what's in it for me, but remember that it might be something fairly nebulous. It could be something like, I'm just gonna meet some more people. I'm gonna meet some people in GME, like in the heads of GME, that might bring me new opportunities, that I could go above being a program director or whatever. So it might be something more solid, like I'm gonna get a paper out of this, I'm gonna get a grant out of this. But keep in mind those more vague benefits. But if there's truly, it's not something that's interests you, it's not something that's gonna benefit you, that's where you're allowed to say no. But you should try to say yes early on when you have that opportunity to gain those experiences. Mentors are everything. Basically, all of my opportunities were thanks to one of my mentors. And just keep in mind your concept of mentors should be very broad. I wish I'd sort of expanded my understanding of mentors sooner. Like I had my very close mentors that, once a month we met and we talked, and what were career goals, and what did we want to do next, and how were the projects going. But I have so many colleagues and so many acquaintances that know me, they know my interests, they know my strengths, they know the things I've succeeded at. And those are people that can throw your name out for an opportunity later, or they can point you in the direction of opportunity. And so, your boss's boss, there's all sorts of people around you that are truly mentors, even if they're not someone you meet with to talk about your career goals regularly. And that comes down to, it really is a network. So all of these people that you meet, if they know what you're interested in, if they know what you're good at, that's going to lead to more opportunities down the road. And last is just pay it forward, because mentoring is obviously phenomenal for our culture or for our community, but you can also learn a lot through mentoring we say the best way to learn is to teach. Same thing. So by mentoring people in research, by mentoring people in creating didactic content, you can learn a lot. And so it's a benefit to you. You can find new opportunities for yourself and the people you're mentoring. You can do more networking. There's a lot of benefits to it. And everyone should, it just goes down the line. Non-junior faculty should be mentoring everyone. And the reason I word it non-junior faculty is this is not something that's isolated to senior faculty. That's not something you have to wait until you're 10 years in your career to mentor people. Like there are people even 2 or 3 years your junior that can benefit from your experiences, or the fact that that they need a central line training in the hospital and they might be a good person to do that. So just keep in mind to pay it forward.
Hello, I'm Lauren Walter, so I'm an associate professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I'm going to tell you, I don't take any credit for these pearls. These were all passed on to me by prior mentors or sponsors, but I have found them extremely useful in my transition to early to mid-career. So starting with number one here. So if you're doing work above and beyond, give it a title or a label, and I'm going to give you a personal example, and then we'll kind of go through the parameters there about what I'm talking about. So early on in my career, I was more interested in education, both UME and GME, and I also developed a significant interest in sex and gender-based medicine. And so I was very curious about the overlap of those two. And I didn't really learn a lot about it in my UME and GME education, so I was kind of curious as to what our residents and our medical students were getting or not getting. And so I met with my program director, I met with some curricular leaders at the medical school, and they kind of provided me with the opportunity to kind of review and audit what was going on from a sex and gender perspective with regards to the education from a GME and a UME perspective. I brought in some collaborators from EM, from IM, and over the course of several months, 12 to 18 months, I believe, we met regularly. We went through the curriculum. We provided feedback. We actually developed an abstract. We presented it at a conference. And so we did all of those things kind of because of my passion, my interest, and those around me. And this wasn't something that I was necessarily asked to do, but I think that maybe you can relate this to maybe something you've been asked to do or a passion project that you've engaged in. And so kind of looking at it from the parameters I listed here. So again, out of your own passion, or maybe you've been tasked to do something that's above or beyond your expected duties or regular job description. This particular entity definitely fit that. Was it in line with the mission or vision of your department or institution? Yeah, they were very much interested in making sure that the most up-to-date evidence-based medicine was being relayed to their trainees, right? Is it consuming a measurable or regular amount of your time? Absolutely. And did we have measurable product or outcome? For sure. And so what did we do? We called this our Sex and Gender-Based Medicine Task Force, and I was the chair. And if you look at my CV today, it's on there. And I have got additional product that I can point to as what this task force did. And so again, if you find yourself in the situation where you're doing something above and beyond, give it a title. If you're not sure what it should be called, ask your vice chair of faculty development or your chair or somebody that you're working with, because you should definitely get credit for it. on your CV and your portfolio when it comes around to promotion. Number 2, is it award season? It's always award season, right? We're always getting a million emails about awards within our specialty, within our subspecialty niches. Something's always happening. So consider a self-nomination or call on a colleague. I think a lot of us, women in particular, tend to kind of sit there and we wait for somebody to recognize how awesome we are and to say, hey, this award, just email, I just got it, you're perfect for it. I'm gonna nominate you. That never happens, right? So somebody told me a long time ago, it was like, what are you waiting for? Nominate yourself. Ask your colleague to nominate you. Does this award description, does it fit you? Does it like 90% fit you? Ask someone to nominate you, and then make it super easy on them and provide them with all the documentation and the letter of support drafts that they need to facilitate that nomination, right? And then I've done this, and it works. I got an award. And even if you don't get an award, that nomination still counts for something, right? If they go through the process and they agree that you are a great candidate for this nomination and they submit your application, you are still a nominee, and that still deserves a line on the CV, and that's still important. And on the flip side, you know, Shannon mentioned pay it forward. Be sure you're ready to pat somebody else's back if they've packed yours. So keep that in mind. And finally, number 3, despite its twists and turns, be able to craft a clear and cohesive career narrative. So in emergency medicine, we all have a ton of interests, right? And so we're all interested in a bunch of different things. We have like squirrel, and we're like over here, and then another squirrel, and we're over here. And I can speak to that personally, right? So I started out in education for the first 5 or 6 years, and then I got the opportunity to kind of dip my toes into clinical research. And after about 2 to 3 years, I kind of made a hard right turn into clinical research to the point that now I'm our director of research and clinical trials. And so it was strongly recommended to me by a mentor several years ago that in crafting my narrative for a bio sketch for grant reviewers, for the P&T committee in my portfolio, that I needed to be able to describe exactly what my career path was in kind of a sensical manner. You know, if you just looked at it on the surface, I was maybe here at one point, and then here, and then over here, and then maybe a little bit back over here. I needed to be able to help them connect the dots so they could understand, you know, where I was, where I am, and where I wanted to go. And for me, the underlying current of all of that was my interest in vulnerable populations and health disparities. That's what drove my education interest. That's what drives my clinical research interest. And so that's the narrative that I create. But would encourage you to kind of keep your career narrative in mind and be able to verbalize it or write it down for those who might be doing some sort of external review, as they often do with promotions. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I guess we're still morning, isn't it? Good morning, everyone. Brett Nix, Wake Forest University. I'm a professor and executive vice chair at our institution, and my pathway in academics has been a little bit of a choose-your-own adventure. I trained, ironically, as you can tell by my great Southern accent, I'm from the West Coast. I grew up in the Seattle area. My mentor physician there trained under John Marks when he was in Denver and said, you need to go to Charlotte. This is the person you need to train under. And I was fortunate enough to go there and be mentored by John as a resident and then also as a faculty member until his death. And we would meet every 6 months after I graduated. And he invested in me, and the comment that he made to me stuck. He said, Brett, he says, I know what your passion is. I know the direction you're going. He says, but being a chair isn't everything. And he said that to me very early on. I didn't know what exactly that meant, but his wisdom seemed to be projecting forward something that I didn't understand. And so I ended up staying on the East Coast, surprisingly, even though I thought I would be West Coast bound. And my chair, Jim Hoekstra, said, Brett, I need somebody with the academic mindset. That's why you're being hired. He says, I'm going to give you a task. And if you complete this with vigor, he says, you'll have the autonomy to create. And what does that mean? What did that look like? And so my first task, then my second task, Jim would give me different things. The first was, hey, can you get an ultrasound program started? And I had some training in that. We got things started and hired in somebody who was fellowship trained to take that over. Can you do billing and coding? Yes, we revamped all of our ledger, went through and said, hey, let's make this financially viable. Can you create observation unit? Yes, launched that in 2006. So it was task by task, because you heard through our colleagues here, sometimes it's the ability to create that people do well. That's my skill set. I'm a horrible maintenance guy. Once something gets to a point of success and it's plateaued, I have to hand off that baton. That is who I am, and I have to recognize that. And it took a while to figure that out. My career path went through this pathway of creating to being an assistant medical director, transitional director, as we went from an academic core to growing community sites up to 16, working through those. Thought that I wanted to be chair, and here's the John Marks in the background saying that's not everything, and fought with that. And then the system said we need the first community CMO. I had some medical education, master's of health administration in the background, said I really don't want to do this, kicking and screaming. 6 months later, said sure. I went to one of our community hospitals, and I was called the sheriff because it was the second worst performing hospital in our state in many different metrics. And it was my job to go in an open medical model, not a university-based, but open medical model, to say, how do you fix this? And I came out bruised and beaten because I said, I will give you 18 months in this, and I will find somebody because I want this other task to create a brand new hospital and grow it from the ground up. And so in an 18-month turnaround, learned a lot, and we were able to move it into the 80th percentile within 18 months. And again, learning through this process. Throughout this entire process, I was academically engaged, publishing, writing, navigating passion, and my passion happened to be global health as well. And so was the Associate Dean for Global Health for our university, started something that didn't exist, started to grow bandwidth in that capacity in areas from my past through Peace Corps and other things that allowed for the opportunity to grow emergency medicine, my passion. And in this, as I was growing as a leader, recognized, hey, we can create amazing clinical opportunities, both at Wake Forest or abroad, but what we fail to do is recognize we need to grow leaders concurrently, not just within our resident population, not just within our student population, but within our faculty as well. So I moved from CMO, did that for about 10 years. Davie Medical Center, it's amazingly easy to create something de novo and create a culture that is amazing. It's so much more difficult to take something that you did not create and change it. And so there was some nuance and learning that I had to come through in that process. Stepped out of my CMO role after about 10 years, started a master's program for Wake Forest called the Masters of Healthcare Leadership that brought in leaders outside of Wake Forest that were in healthcare. Not academicians per se, but those who are capable of teaching in this space to bring value to senior leaders, 5 years or greater in some level of healthcare. And we reached between Alaska and the U.S. Virgin Islands. That was the capture that we had for our program. Again, I learned more from the students than perhaps they ever learned from me. And through this, there's this cross-pollination of discussion, which are my 3 points we'll talk about. The first is this value, and you've heard it in part already, which is too often, if you pick up your phone and you start surfing, all of a sudden your focus becomes narrowed. It identifies what you're looking at. It identifies what you're thinking about and what you're cueing. And so now your blinders have become very, very narrow. Whether you're junior faculty, mid-career, even senior faculty, the question is, how often do we actually get out of our echo chamber? How often do we leave the bubble? To ask ourselves, hey, Federico, if I were to sit down with you, who's the person that you know that I should? Can you make that connection? And we have that conversation. Is that possible? And is it outside of my sphere of influence or my sphere of expertise? To understand this, because as you can see, the points that are here are very real. It enhances creativity. It opens your thought. It makes you ask better questions. And as a leader, what should we do? We should be gifted in asking good questions. These are the key aspects as it relates to it, because, again, you can see the value proposition there. The other is simply this. For those of you who are old enough to remember back almost 15 years ago, Simon Sinek came on the stage in the Pacific Northwest when he talked about this concept of this golden circle. And for those who followed him ever since, that has been the creation of his platform, which is simply in emergency medicine and in academics, we know what we do. You can go anywhere in the world. You can walk into an emergency department, you're like, this is emergency medicine. How you do it's going to be nuanced by your experience and how and what you've learned from your experience. Not just your experience, but what did you gain and learn from it? But the better question for each one of us is, why are we doing it? That gets into the comment that you made, right? The first thing you say about yourself, is it physician? Is it family? Is it something different? That's the driver behind this. And each one of us have this story. But the question I have for you is, amongst your residents, faculty, or otherwise, do you know their story? And do they know yours? When I started at CMO, a brand new hospital, we created this thing called the hot seat. Yeah, it was stolen from ESPN, Rome's burning, that type of scenario. But you would sit down in the middle, and this was with our leadership team, which was every aspect of the department, from EVS, environmental services, to nursing, to everyone else. And we would meet once a month, and I was the first one to go, and I told my story and set the stage as far as, this is how I got to who I am. These are the things that matter to me. This is what drives me. And what we realized was that there was so much more similarity amongst our entire cohort than there were the things that divided us, right? The fact that most of us grew up in this type of an environment. Oh, hey, now I know why that person reacts this way in a code, especially when it's a child, or those types of things. There's power in that process. And in this piece from the what is your why piece, it came back down to the question is sometimes we don't know our direction, and sometimes I just have to give effort. Sometimes I have to get out of the whirlwind of this stuff because we are all busy. Can you say no? And when should you say yes? But more importantly with that is in that yes, what's that value proposition? And I'll be honest with you, if I went back to the beginning of my career, I wouldn't know what that was. I was unclear. And that was John Mark's key to me in that essence, and looking back and looking at the letters that he wrote to me and the things we discussed, which was simply, you're going to learn as you go. And about every 5 years, you're going to pivot. But what you'll find is the greater value proposition are on these big things. Yes, small wins matter as your faculty, but what are the things that are going to exponentially or synergistically move you to that next level in the conversation? So think about this. What are my time sinks? How do I say no? What are my small wins in a new project? How do I get to yes with my team? And more importantly, what's going to move the ship, move the situation? And the last one is this. You are only as good as your ongoing growth. As a leader, the biggest challenge that we have is we hit a pinnacle. You're a full professor, you're tenured, whatever else. Does that mean you just stop? No. That means you should continue to grow at a higher rate. You're learning, you're asking questions, because if you do not, you are limiting your team. With that, I think we'll move on to questions and answers. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take one of these and you guys can share that mic. Turn this on. Okay, so we've got probably about 20 minutes or so, and this is where it's a great opportunity. We want to kind of really drill down into these facets. You hear the trajectories of different faculty, different paths they've taken. There's a lot of overlaps, so a lot of similarities there. I think one thing that really pops out, is this thing that I've heard a few times, is really kind of quite thoughtful thinking about this, is that the closest or the shortest distance between two people is a story, right? And so whether it's mentoring or experiences or whatever, I think it's central to mentoring for sure. But we want to dig in a little further. So questions about thinking about, if you could speak to your younger self, what would you have said? What would you say? Or when you were at this kind of crossroads, what things do you wish you would have known or somebody could have told you? Because the hidden curriculum is such that sometimes there are things that you step into and everyone else thinks you know what you're supposed to do, and so they don't tell you. It's just assumed. Sometimes you step in the role and it's a different environment and they're not going to tell you because there's competition. So these are the things we want to get at. So questions? Anybody? Let's bring you the mic.
Hey, I'm Caroline Fryermuth from the University of Cincinnati. I guess one of my questions is, when you feel like you need something from, your chair or whatever, say, it'd be a resource for something, and, the answer is not right now, how do you continue to advocate yourself without feeling that, you're badgering somebody or whatnot?
With my chair in the room. It's a good question. I think part of the thing is if they say not right now, it kind of gets back to what he's talking about, but more on the larger level of the value versus the cost and really trying to demonstrate that. So usually I will try to kind of reconsider what the proposal is, figure out what data points I can pull over the next 6 months, year, whatever time frame they needed to, get more information, or we don't have the funding right now, and try to represent it that way. So at least have more information as opposed to just, hey, I still want that, hey, I still want that.
I'll comment. It's a great question. I love this question. Many times it has everything to do with vernacular. What's the framing of the ask? Which is it a me or is it a we? Does it align with the direction of the department, maybe a perspective of direction you need to be going? Maybe there's something that you've identified here at SAEM. Hey, we're missing this. We need to build this. And if you can make the ask align with the chair or the department's perspective, The answer to getting to yes is much easier then. But if it is not really selfishly motivated, but not aligned, it's much more difficult.
So I'll, as kind of moderator, and I'll try to dig a little deeper in some of these questions that come up. So I would say once upon a time when I started emergency medicine, when there were radio stations and all this stuff, and you'd say, W, whatever, or K, whatever, at some of these spots, at some of these sessions, say like, think about the radio station WIFM. What's in it, for me, for the other person? So if you're talking to your chair, your approach is like, their antennas are up, and it's like, okay, what am I going to get out of this? And so then with that, you can weave your discussion, your ask, properly frame it as, just like Brett's saying, the team perspective. Sometimes it's just, flat no, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it's no forever. Maybe it's just a pause, so things to consider in that. More questions?
Oh, one point I wanted to add to
yes.
that. Yes, that one piece of advice I got from an amazing mentor who might happen to be the moderator of this session is that wins from you, any win that you have is also a win for your chair. And so if you frame it to your chair that, hey, if I'm winning here, you're winning, we're all winning, I think that's what it comes down to. And I think that everyone has to be, sometimes you have to make that more salient to everybody, but honestly, that's what it comes down to, is your chair. If you win, your chair will see that. Your chair can present it to a dean and say, hey, we have this person in our department that is winning. And maybe if you can make whatever your ask is, maybe you might have to make the path to the win more clear with that ask, and like how that ask gets you to that win. And I think that comes down to the point we made about framing the ask, and just making that path more salient and that connection more salient. So,
Question.
Thank you so much. A lot of your points really resonated with me, and unfortunately, I had to learn it kind of the hard way. And maybe if I had this talk a few years ago, it would have answered a lot of questions earlier on. But say no, right? So I find myself in a unique position where I'm director of research in a new program, and I'm trying to create that infrastructure for scholarly activity for GME, advance the faculty around me, and then my own personal research interests as well. Time is really valuable to me, and I'd like the visual that you had in terms of effort and value, and I've been trying to focus on those low effort, high value projects as a priority, but also not turning away, mentees, potential mentees who maybe require a little bit more effort, a little less value, because I do think there's some value in terms of their experience going through the process. How do you say no to a project or an opportunity without burning a bridge, without preventing them from coming to you again in the future for perhaps collaborating on a project that may be more higher value later on?
I think it depends on why you're saying no. And again, I think it gets back to framing. So I had an opportunity this past year that would have been great, but I just didn't feel like it was the right time for me. It would have pulled me way out of clinicals. I'm only 10 years out of residency. It didn't seem like the right time. And I think being very honest and when appropriate, kind of vulnerable about hey, I honestly think I might lose my clinical skills if I drop to 2 shifts a month at this part of my career. As much as I would love this opportunity, I really still love my residents, and I'm not done with my current role, or I'm not done with this current project. So I think it depends what level of thing it is. But I think being honest about the reasons and just communicating those will make sure that you can maintain that relationship.
So a 2-word email saying no thanks.
Exactly how you do it. Then you put it in ChatGPT and it makes it better.
Oh, there you go. But this question is the perspective is the reverse of the first one, right? So now you're the chair or you're the leader who has to say no, right? So but the response is probably the same, right? So where before you say no, or before you need to probably see the whole vision. So what's the whole vision? What's the value proposition there? Is it shared? What's, and if you're saying no, I think, again, just transparency, maybe no right now, but this is why. So again, just kind of a flip of that first question. So now you're in that chair or leadership role, so.
Not an easy answer. multifactorial, because think about the situation. Maybe somebody's coming to you, junior faculty, and you see there's tremendous capacity in this individual, but they don't recognize it yet. And so you're going to say, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of me to elevate them up because you see the value proposition. Maybe it's aligning with what your chair is as far as the development of the research pathway, and maybe you've defined what that is within your organization. If it's somewhere in between where you're saying, okay, it's not multiplicative, it's only additive, that's probably where you're going to say no. And the question then becomes, to whom can I set that? Is there other faculty elsewhere that I can say, hey, you know what? I don't have the bandwidth for this, but I think this is a great idea. So-and-so aligns well with that. What does that mean? You have to have that conversation in advance of that, knowing that you may deflect to another individual. But in this process, when you're assessing those things, it shouldn't be something that you're deciding on your own. Who's the person that you spend time being mentored by? Who is the peer that you have conversation with? Who's the soundboard that you're going to engage with to say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. I've got these opportunities. I think this is the best alignment. So-and-so has the ability to take it to the next level if we do this. This project is just a project. It's just additive. It gives us another number, but it doesn't move to that upper trajectory, top right, that you're looking for.
So I'll inject a couple of things. Or go ahead. You have something.
I was just going to add one last piece is that sometimes if it's from someone who is maybe more senior than you, maybe it's a chair, maybe vice chair, et cetera, sometimes it's like, hey, here's what, having a discussion with them, here's what I'm doing now. Of these lists of things I'm doing now, what do you think I can take out to do whatever it is that they want you to do? And if they can't find an answer, then probably the point of no is more salient. So sometimes it's having that honest discussion that, hey, this is what I'm doing now. And I think sometimes, especially with chairs, they're so busy that they may not necessarily be aware of everything you're doing at any given point. And so sometimes it's making that, hey, this is all what I'm doing, more clear to them at any given moment, because they're responsible for obviously many, many people, and figuring out the narratives of, especially having large faculty, everybody is, challenging. So sometimes just making more clear what you are doing. So.
Yeah, all amazing. Great points. Two things that I'll add there. One is we're so used to like go, right? Emails popping in, night, morning, you wake up thinking about work, whatever. So it's go. These things present themselves, and you just are inclined to shoot from the hip and make a decision right there, and then if you're not making that decision right there, you start feeling guilty about, okay, I'm going to put this aside. Then it's like 1 day, 2 days, and like, I got to get back to this. But I think there's the important piece in there is to think at the forefront is to be mindful. What's the ask? Mindful, everything that they've described. So mindfulness, meaning like just pump the brakes a little bit, think about that, and remember that it may be it may be different. We're working on this international conference right now, and working with some of our colleagues in another part of the world. And someone said, "You guys are saying no too much." And it's like, instead of saying no too much, say yes, but can we do this? So yes, but how about if we change it like this? That's one option. But fully realizing that probably the most precious commodity that we all have is our own time. So you really have to come to grips and make those decisions about what am I really going to do with my time. And sometimes you step into getting more busy, and that's okay. And sometimes you step out of that exactly for that, to have more time to do some of the things that you really want to do to kind of move yourself forward, advancement, faculty development, et cetera. Question?
Give it a shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. He's over here thinking. I'm Ryan Gibney, also from University of California, Irvine, and we did not stack the deck, I promise. But Brett, you said something that kind of resonated with me, which was creativity in what we do. And I'm early career, but midlife. I started off as a musician and culinary, and so creativity is a huge part of that. But as you grow in those, the ability to edit and show restraint become the next level of your success. And so I've been fortunate to have a lot of opportunities come at you. How would you say editing and restraining those kind of creative instincts and like coming to a conference like this and, we can do this and that, and early career to really shape the best path forward for yourself?
It's almost like saying no to yourself.
Yeah. Well, That's a wonderful question, and what it does is I think, probably will resonate differently with each individual. The question for me is, when I hear that, it gets back to the starting point, which for me is that golden circle. Why did you decide to go into emergency medicine with a creative background, culinary artist stepping into this specialty, which if you think about what we do in emergency medicine, it is artistry. You're taking patients that are coming in that are unclear as far as etiologies, uncertain diagnostic processing with very limited information, and then you get the creative process. Is it my bedside acumen? Is it the ability for me to articulate? Is it the visual capacity for me to assess this patient? There is artistry in that. The question for you then becomes, how do you take the artistry that you have and bring that into your career? And if that's unclear, and you sit down with gentlemen like Sean and you have this dialogue and you say, how do I merge these things together? And the answer might be, you don't know yet until you sample in these different areas. And it's in that sampling that you start to find this amalgamation of direction that starts to refine itself over time. If there's something that drops at you as an opportunity, I think what Federico said is brilliant, which is pump the brakes and go for a walk. Grab your dog, whatever it is that you do. Go for your walk. I have a dog named Willow. I had a dog named Toby. If you want a book, I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. It's called Standing Naked in the Rain. And you'll see why this matters, which is simply this, which is sometimes you have to take a moment to reflect on what's going on, what the ask is, and what really matters. And we don't do that. We are so busy in what we do. We are caught up in being academic and taking care of our patients, and more importantly, probably with navigating life. But it's in that process that your creativity is bound. You're limited. So pump your brakes, ask yourself, where's the alignment? What is that opportunity? And if it's uncertain, try something. And if it doesn't work, pivot. That's what we have to do. That's what we do well. Think about emergency medicine, how we navigate the front-end operations. We try something, it works, our ESIs change, we pivot. We do something different, we add APPs, we pivot. That's what we do. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's a perspective.
Yeah, I think the concept of a vision board was recently introduced to me, and so, you know, it's kind of a creative crafting for high achievers to be able to kind of really lay out your 5, your 10-year plan, and you know, where does this ask of yourself fit within your vision board? That's something to consider.
And just to reiterate, I think it comes down to your why. I think it's helpful to always have that why back in your head, like, why am I here? And as you're moving along, if whatever additional task doesn't align with your why, then it's probably a no. And if it may not align with your why now, but maybe it will align with your why, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. So I think it comes back to constantly thinking about your why. And your why might change over time, but I think we often I think where you can run into some issues is that you're moving along, you see things, you start doing things, and you're like, oh, this is cool. Like, I think we talked about chasing the squirrel, and the squirrels don't come back to your why, and now you're chasing all these different squirrels when you're far away from your why, and that may be okay if your why is in a different place, but if it's not, then you have to be very deliberate in terms of thinking about that. And I think I think the vision board is a great idea to making that very tangible.
Yeah, so much of what we do, like in the research world, it's all creativity. I was just having a discussion just last week with a close colleague of mine at University of Virginia. His wife has a whole elementary and upper level ballet company, that's what she does. And he's a data scientist, and he's like big data, crunching, predictive analytics. And he's like, I talk to my wife all the time because, it's like, you don't understand. It's like, you're so, in this artistry world, et cetera. It's all creativity. This research is all creative. So that's why, your ideas, your thoughts help me think about this. So I just would say, leverage those creativity pieces. They're not at odds, they're together. Find a way to leverage those, those strengths, which you already have, seen it, back at home. So that's fantastic. And you just kind of keep moving forward, being mindful along the way, Other questions?
Hi, my name is Christine Shaw. I'm a fellow at UAB. Being very early in my career, I have a good why, and there's fortunately and unfortunately, there's multiple opportunities that all fill that why. So when you're plugging through those opportunities, what features do you look for in those opportunities to say this is going to advance my career better than one thing or another, when they all fit the why?
Yeah, I agree with Brett. It's a great problem to have. I think that's where you have to start pulling some other components in. So if you're like, these all sound like they will get me where I want to go and fit my why, which one might I be better at? You know, if you are really a people person, then maybe running, you know, the clinical foundations course of the School of Medicine with 400 students is like perfect for you. And if you're not as much of an extrovert and trying to remember 400 students' names sounds very, very scary, that might not be the way to go. So I think that's where you have to start looking at your own strengths and interests, even beyond your why, to kind of figure out where you might be most successful. Or if you're feeling like a challenge, pick the one that sounds the most uncomfortable and really just run with it. And that kind of depends where you are in life. If you've got a new puppy and a new kid at home, that might not be the time to take the very, very challenging option.
I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to that other than the perspective of potential. It's one thing to see what that role is, but what is the potential that might be beyond that? And that might not be clear. Many times it's also framing, are there particular things with that role that you might want to add to it? And can you make that ask in advance such that it's a yes, it's part of that contract? Many times it's a here's the opportunity, and we stop there rather than thinking to ourselves, here's an opportunity, here's how I can add value to this organization, this team, or otherwise, and there's a potential step with that. And articulating that in advance such that those that are bringing you in not just see you filling this role, but moving beyond that potentially as well.
Actually, one more thing I'll add is keep in mind, even if it's not someone you know well, if it's an existing role that you're stepping into, almost anyone in academics is happy to kind of chat with you. And there's probably a lot of behind the scenes stuff that you don't really understand about the role until you're there. So, you know, putting aside a 30-minute conversation to have with the person who's in that role now to feel, you know, what do you wish you'd known before you've taken this role? And what do you do that I don't see from where I'm sitting will help make that decision.
Brilliant. That's a perfect example of, of a hidden curricular facet right there. Just ideal, you know? So, and think about it, because oftentimes these things present themselves to ourselves, 2 or 3, and like they all seem good. I can go in this direction, this direction. They might not diverge too much in ultimately where you want to be, okay? First of all, think about and articulate on paper where you want to be. Writing is thinking. So when you're writing, you begin to articulate how you write, what you write, and that becomes your story, as one of the other faculty already said. Learn to describe who you are, your background, who you are, and what is your program to work. That's number 1. But number 2 is, as Shannon was saying, is we feel like sometimes being the new person or being asked to do something new, like it's not okay for me to step beyond the bounds and say, do you like it? Is it good? What did it do for you? Step out, ask, and if you feel like you can't, ask people that are on the periphery in that same kind of role, that role that you're looking at, and get that information. I think, critically, the relationships, again, they're just critical. Mentoring, there's so much you can gather from that. And as physicians, I think it's really tough. Even several years ago, I'd say probably now about 2 decades ago, there was this cardiologist, even before that, the whole thing about patient safety, all these people dying because of our mistakes, all these other things, everybody starts feeling bad, and then people start, kind of bolstering up and saying, to err is human, it's okay to be human, you make mistakes, et cetera. But really, if we stop, kind of get behind closed doors, how many of us really think it's okay? We can say, yeah, it's not okay, because these are real lives. These are humans. These are, brothers, sisters, children, et cetera. So it's not okay. And then, it makes it difficult for us. Same thing, it's not okay for us, even in a conference, to like raise your hand as like someone says, no, you're actually completely 150% wrong. It's like, no one wants to say that. It's better to kind of keep your mouth shut. But in that same move, ask those questions. Step out a little bit. Look and ask other people's, but be willing to ask more about those positions and know where you really kind of want to be. I've had plenty of people say, you can't create a 5-year plan, you can't create a 10-year plan, try 2 years, that's the most. I say, baloney from my perspective. You've got to think, where your mind goes, your feet will follow for the most part. You still have to adhere, there's a lot of work, but it's really important. One more question.
So many great nuggets so far. I tried the vision board, and it wound up just being a bunch of young, shirtless Brad Pitt pictures. Ironically, I do a lot of my deep introspections while standing naked in the rain, so I'm going to pick up one of your books and read it on the plane ride home. I love these conferences because it gives a great opportunity to see what other individuals in the field are doing, and I learn a lot in terms of like how I'm going to change the practice at bedside, future research, public health, et cetera. But one of the things I love about this is to catch up with people I haven't seen in probably 11 months and 3 weeks, right, since the last year's conference. I do a terrible job with relationship maintenance, not just like in my personal life, but also in my professional life. And obviously, as we're looking ahead and promoting ourselves and moving, maybe there's changes of institution, changes of roles. I do a terrible job of going back and keeping in contact with people who, I had very close relationships earlier on in my career. Do you guys have a good way of maintaining relationships? I know it's difficult with time. Do you have any strategies, and how important is that, I guess? Thanks.
That's a great question. I think that
I haven't seen you in like 11 months.
yeah.
I'm like curious to hear what you're doing and excited for you, but it's not like the 10 minutes in the beginning of your talk. I mean, when are we get to talk more?
Well, you started by coming here. You came here, so. No, I think that that's a great point. I think it does become challenging because people get busier, et cetera. I try to think that like it becomes even more challenging when obviously different institutions, different regions, different time zones. But sometimes like there are a handful of people in my head where I think that like, hey, I really like this person beyond the research, beyond everything else. Like I really connect with this person. And this is me speaking almost as like I'm an introvert. And so like I do well, I guess my superpower as being an introvert is connecting with people on an individual basis. And so I think about like, I always envy the extroverts that can go in a room and then have small talk with a ton of people. But I think about like, who are these handful of people that I really connect with that I need to, nurture that relationship or constantly pour water into that relationship so I don't lose it. And so almost it's like someone a while ago along the same lines of a vision board is like a mentorship board, is that you start off with your yes. Once you move out of the pictures of shirtless Brad Pitt, who are the handful of people that you really appreciate your relationships with? And those people, you have to find a way to find some sort of sustainable connection. Maybe it's a simple email like, hey, how's it going? Like, I don't know if maybe we have each other's numbers, but hey, how's it going? A text message, email, and every couple of months or so constantly check in. And then when you move out, you might have some people that, maybe it comes out to you really like them, but because of time, because of all these other things, or because some people are just skilled at like keeping in contact with many, many people. But as you call it, with some people, it is just showing up, honestly, like to a conference. And that is a lot of it, a workshop, a conference, whatever have you, and just seeing them, connecting with them there. And that time is valuable in and of itself. I can think of a lot of relationships, collaborations that I've made just by a conference. And every time I see the person at the conference, it's almost like it hadn't been 11 months and whatever some days. So I think that's coming from an introvert's perspective. So I don't know, maybe there's someone else that can offer.
I'm terrible about it too. I honestly have no shame about it, and I figure I'm excited to see them that once a year, so they probably are too. So, most of my meals when I'm at a conference, I am having breakfast with someone, I'm having lunch with someone, I'm having dinner with someone, and maybe I won't see them again until next year, but I enjoyed the time, and I do get a chance to kind of bounce ideas off of them.
Yeah, and there may be a couple very relationships in the interim that you're very deliberate about communicating with them, and that those relationships may evolve over time. So maybe who you're making an effort to contact, this year, maybe that's going to be somebody else next year, and so on as you kind of move on in your career and you mean different things to each other. But yeah, I think that's why I'm exhausted because for the last 3 days, it's just been the mental energy to like reconnect is fantastic, but I'm exhausted.
My lips are chapped, I have laryngitis.
Yeah. The joys of the extrovert
Dry
introvert.
heat maybe, but it's also like just like talking nonstop.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah.
I'll make one comment as it relates. I think there was a session earlier today. They talked about this idea around atomic habits. If you haven't listened to it as a podcast, it's probably better to do that than necessarily read the book. But here's one. If you are like a natural introverted space as far as your processing, when you come here, you become extroverted for the 5 days that you're here, then you go back to your normal. If there are individuals that you have reached out to and you have these connections and you're like, gosh, I just fall off and I'll see them in 11 months, 3 weeks, and a handful of days. Ask yourself, can I go to my calendar and drop their name in on a quarterly basis? And it just pops up, and then you just send off something. What that does is it creates this time sequence in your mind that all of a sudden now, hey, I need to connect with that individual. And you start doing it. And after you get to the third quarter, it becomes natural because you're going to see them here, and now that connection is just elevated slightly. Yes, it's programmatic, but that being said, for many of us, we are so busy that drops in, you're like, oh, and then all of a sudden, that person comes across your heart or your mind, and you reach out to them and say, hey, just thinking about you. There's a level of connection that's there, and they're like, oh, hey, thanks for reaching out. This is what's going on in life. And then that changes. What we do know outside of these momentary connections is that, what do they say, that in this psychological processing, we are amalgamation of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So who are those 5? Is it the 5 that it should be? And how are you refining that over time?
All right, we'll wrap it up. We went a little over, but thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'm sure all the faculty, including myself, you know, if you guys can see our slides there, our email contact on there. Should you ever want to reach out to us, please do. We would love to talk to you, connect with you. There's so much more here, you know, and all of us have all kinds of, you know, other experiences we can share with you. So feel free, and thank you for coming on the last day. Thank you.